From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. We're coming up on the end of Mental Health Awareness Month, and we've got one more bonus episode for you, so I really hope you enjoy it. And now broadcasting from Las Vegas, I'm Nick Tanchman. It's time for some Pod Therapy. Hello, THERAPALs. We have a great bonus episode for you here today. I'm really excited about it. Today on the pod, I interview Monique Mascetti. She's a therapist here in the Las Vegas area that specializes in working with veterans. We discuss some of the challenges involved in working with veterans, her personal experiences growing up in a military family, and some of the systemic obstacles that exist in getting help. I want to warn our listeners out there that we do discuss some difficult topics and talk about traumatic experiences, but I really hope you listen to this episode. I hope you really enjoy it. It was eye-opening for me, and it's a topic that needs a lot of attention. Also, I have to apologize for the quality of the recording. We recorded this at my house. My dogs are in the background, so you can hear them every once in a while going through the kitchen to drink some water. About 45 minutes into it, my beagle is asleep and she snores, so you'll get to hear that in the background. But if you can make it through all that, it's a great episode, so I really hope you enjoy it. So here it is, my interview with Monique Mascetti. Thank you. Okay, I'm here with Monique Mascetti.
Great. You did.
I'm going to stop that.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Okay.
It could be machete like the knife. That's the official name, but people Americanize it
Italian?
as Mascetti. Yeah.
Oh, really?
I prefer machete. Wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, given the choice, of course. I would take machete over any name.
Right?
So, okay.
It might be a little scary, though, me being a therapist. But it kind of suits me, right? Because I have, should I say, a straight slicer?
Therapist machete.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. All right. So.
Okay.
Your specialty, you're a therapist. Your specialty is kind of working with military.
Yes.
Before we get into that, kind of give us a little bit of background. What is your degree in, first of all?
So I have an undergrad in horticultural therapy.
Like any therapist does, right? Very common.
Right. Which is using plants as recreational therapy. That's where I started.
Okay.
And when I absolutely love working with plants and people. But one of the things I recognized when I started doing that, as soon as people's hands get moving, that's when all of their stuff comes out.
Right.
And I had a really cool opportunity to work with vets, and a lot of PTSD stuff came out, a lot of trauma. And I remember working with one vet in particular. He loved being in the greenhouse. And I had this moment of, oh my God, I have no idea what to do with this. Like, how do I help this guy? And that's when I knew I had to go back to school.
Okay.
And so I did. I went back to school and worked on getting my master's in counseling.
Okay. And so you're currently licensed in Nevada as CPC, LMFT?
CPC.
CPC, okay.
And licensed clinical addiction counselor. And I'm also a supervisor, so I've got a few interns.
Excellent. Yay. All right.
Yeah, I like being on the other side.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
Right, yes.
Okay. And so where does your interest in working with veterans and working in the military, where does that come from?
So, military has been my life, really. I think I was kind of brought in this world to service that population. So my mom was a war bride. So my father was stationed in Naples right after the war, met my mom, they fell in love, married, brought her over, right? I was an oops baby. I don't know if outside of the military population, if they use that term, but oops baby is, after a deployment.
Oh, okay.
So my dad's last tour in Vietnam, came home and unexpectedly I came about 9 months later. And what we didn't know at the time was that my dad was very sick, so he didn't make it. He died because of his exposure to Agent Orange.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
wow.
So kind of coming into the military that way, being, first, I consider myself first generation since my father wasn't there.
Right.
And my mom was, right? And so,
right.
I had to break a lot of the traditions of, it was very specific that this is not the Italian way to do things. It's a very American way to do things. So we always had that cultural battle and being a part of the military community. So like if we ever got sick or anything happened, we would go on base and take care of stuff. So it was a part of the community, but not fully a part of the community.
Okay, so kind of like between worlds in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think was different kind of growing up that way as opposed to growing up completely disassociated from the military?
Culture. So, growing up in a different culture, with my mom being Italian, military culture, the language, the expectations of hurry up and wait. Like we always had to be super early for something, which made no sense to me, and then wait still makes no sense to me because I prefer to work on Italian time. But just the. I remember when I broke my nose and we had to go on base, right? And I had a concussion, but I didn't know at the time. And I was trying to stay upright, and the military doc walks in and he goes, "You broke your nose, not your legs, get up." I was like,
wow.
And I just proceeded to vomit all over the place. And he's like, "Hold on a minute." That's when he realized I had a concussion. And
so the bedside manner is a little bit different in the military.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is old military too,
right.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So you kind of grew up in that lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know, like at a young age, that you wanted to work in that population?
Absolutely. I actually wanted to serve.
Oh.
But in fact, I have numerous family members who had. But at the time, so I suffered from adolescent onset depression. Grew up. My mom was grieving quite terribly.
Sure.
So I had no control over my depression at the time, but I really wanted to join the military, and I wasn't able to because I was a high school dropout. Back then, they didn't take high school dropouts.
Oh.
So I did the next best thing. I married somebody in the military.
So you were getting in one way or the other?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And I was really excited about the lifestyle. I had like very specific things that I wanted to do by being a spouse. I really wanted to go to Germany. I really wanted to go overseas. And we were able to do that. I got my clock by a German clock. And the experience of going overseas. So just being a part of the community, it was amazing.
Wow. Okay. So then you get into, you're now married into the military.
Yes.
You get into doing the therapy. Bring us up to today. What is your current role?
So a couple things. I don't have the right initials by my name. So I'm not a social worker.
Right.
I didn't know this going in. I went to grad school while I was in Germany with the University of Maryland because I had just gotten my undergrad. We, got stationed in Germany. There was nothing for me to do, and I was trying to get into grad school, and I found University of Maryland, and I found the counseling degree, and I was so excited. I didn't recognize that the federal system is really partial to social work. I had no idea. I didn't do my research. In fact, myself and all of my peers in my cohort, we were all working on the same idea. We wanted to work with vets. And so I took every opportunity I could to research vets and military population. So I concentrated on military population, but had no idea I wouldn't be invited into the industry.
And for our listeners, this is a good point to bring up, because when we're talking about therapists, there's not one therapy degree. There's a multitude of different degrees you can have. You can be, there are some clinical psychologists that have a, therapy practice. There's LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapists, certified professional counselors, LADCs, and the gold standard seems to be the social work degree.
Of course you would say that.
Because that's what I have.
Yeah, you're a little
But
partial.
I don't. Yeah, but I don't actually have the license for it. I just have
Right.
the background. But yeah, that seems to be like the golden ticket.
It is.
And it's because it's one of the biggest reasons why is because it's kind of universal across the United States. So the reciprocity between states is pretty even. And you can diagnose a lot with it.
I think, too, social work has been around longer. They've got a stronger lobby.
Right. I mean, that's part of what social work is macro level change. So it's lobbying. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I've been told in many settings that we don't know the medical model. And I'm like, hey, I get that. I've learned numerous models. Give me an opportunity to demonstrate. If it's a class, if it's a certification, hey, no problem. I can do that. But it's just you don't have the right initials.
Yeah.
You know, go back to school, get another master's or a PhD. I don't know that I want to do that.
Yeah.
Just to work in the military population. So for the most part, I tried everything I could to get in. I worked as a mental health tech, as a contractor. I tried that and thought, I'll make connections and so I'll catch a job. The only way I could have gotten hired was as an addiction specialist, but there were two there and they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. And I thought, well, if I'm on death watch waiting for a job, this just isn't going to work. So I just kind of thought, okay, it's just not right for me to get into the military population. And so I kind of I actually took the job at your agency and kind of went in addictions. And I was always thinking, what I know statistically about vets and military, what brings them in to therapy is a domestic violence issue or an addiction issue. So I thought, let me get my experience here so that, I can kind of check off the box and maybe this is going to be an area where I can conserve the community, just kind of doing a different route or a different system.
Since you brought that up, let's jump into that because I have a theory as to why that is. You said the thing that brings them in is either domestic violence or addiction.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
Well, you got to understand the military, and one of the major criteria for everybody in the military is they have to be able to still do the soldiering. Again, you can tell I speak Army. Not all of them are soldiers, but they still have to be able to carry a weapon. All of them have to qualify to be able to carry a weapon. So if they have a domestic violence issue or they have any kind of mental health issue, it could stop them, it could prolong them from qualifying, which would mean they cannot do their job, and they have an opportunity to either A, fix the problem, or B, get out, get forced out. Right.
So it's kind of an ultimatum at that point.
And so I don't know if this is appropriate or not. When I did work at behavioral health, I noticed very carefully that treatment was lower level stuff.
Okay.
So, and same thing with the VA. Back when I started serving this community, the VA appeared to be, to me, in a dual relationship. So, VA makes a determination, hey, you're done with your military service. We're gonna take a look at what's going on with you, and we're gonna decide whether or not you have a disability and how much we're gonna pay you. But the VA is also responsible for treating whatever it is that ills that they have based on their service. So that appears to me to be a dual relationship.
I've never thought about that.
And I'm sorry, can I just...
Yeah. I mean,
it's bullshit. It's total bullshit.
I could edit out anything you want me to. I'm not going to, but I just want you to know I could edit out.
Total bullshit. Can you imagine the VA they're basically your key holder going, you know what, you've exited the military. So, and the way they were with PTSD, they were so incredibly stingy with that diagnosis. I'm not trained to say, hey, if I give you a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, this other department over here is going to have to pay a shit ton of money for you for life.
Right.
So I don't want to answer to them. I'm trained to say when I see symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, multiple deployments, multiple deaths, multiple, engagements in battles. There's something going on here. Let's take a look. Not crap. We're gonna go over budget on payment. So for a while there, the VA they were only diagnosing, and I can't say, I'm not an expert in that. It appeared that they were very stingy with their diagnosis, and that people had to be incredibly severe to receive a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. So we're talking about chronic homelessness. Homelessness can be part of post-traumatic stress disorder, but come on.
Right.
Come on. So I was just really bothered by that kind of disparity. It has appeared that the pendulum has swept the other way. I'm seeing a lot more people who are in the system who come to me and, as in the civilian sector and say, yeah, I do have a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. And I'm like, you got it from where? They're like, I'm like, did you go to a doc and then go to the VA? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, wait. Does the VA recognize that you have post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis? He said, it's funny you say that. It took me a long time to get them to. Yeah, I know.
Do you think part of that is because we're a lot more, we as in therapists and the community is a lot more vocal, and we're a lot more attentive to PTSD, and therefore it's almost kind of putting a little pressure on the VA to be like, hey, this is a bigger deal, you need to start treating this?
I think that it's kind of a weird thing. I know most of the civilians I've worked with, either who are clinicians or even, like if I had a mixed group with vets and, addicts, right? Because I treated a lot of vets in an addiction setting. Most people just think, that has PTSD. It's just something that people are just thinking that the two go together. And I think that people are trying to be aware of what service would mean and how difficult it could be. But I think that it's more of just kind of like a knee-jerk, stereotype. I think that those of us in the civilian sector, we're trying to understand it, and we're trying to be open to it. But I think my experience with most civilians treating vets is it's really hard to treat a vet, and vets are really tough to crack. And so most of the clinicians I worked with, they're like, yeah, I'd rather not. I'm like, send them to me, man.
Right.
Bring them to me. I speak their language, man.
Well, and that is one of the stereotypes that I've heard. I've worked with some vets, but I haven't worked in a program specific for vets. Like I've worked in programs and I've had vets, and I have noticed it has been kind of one of those things where it is sometimes very difficult for them to open up and start talking about it. But I always kind of assumed that part of the issue with them getting help was that, which I think is. But now what I'm kind of hearing you say is that there's a much larger systemic issue going on in getting them help.
So the last program I was at, I was pushing. So I was pushing for a vet-specific program. I went to the training to do the first responders and the vets, the vet-specific workshops, and I was pushing to do, we wrote a trauma protocol with vets in mind. Vets aren't the only people in addiction who have exposure to trauma, so we wanted to make the trauma protocol open for all. And we actually did separate the vets in our program when we did do the trauma group, and it was a phenomenal group. Oh my God, it was phenomenal.
Yeah, so you're talking about not only vets, first responders, right? So police, fire department, EMTs, stuff like that.
Which, incidentally, a lot of people who exit the military go into becoming police officers. It's one of the easier transitions. So one of the hardest things for people coming out of the military is, okay, is there anything in civilian life that's like what I did? my ex-husband was on a military fighting vehicle, not a tank, right? So there aren't any tanks in the civilian world, right?
Right.
So, he was a leader, and he managed people, and he managed equipment. So, kind of trying to help people kind of translate what their military service can do for them in the civilian sector. And so police officers are a big one, firefighters are another one, paramedics.
Yeah. I always thought that was kind of strange too, because it's one of the recruiting tactics that they kind of use is, hey, learn all these job readiness skills. But then when you get in the military and then it's time to exit, it's difficult.
It absolutely is. Again, there's a couple things that go with that. I mean, they literally teach them kind of to tone it down. Because, down to like their watches. Your watch is too high speed. You look too technical. Slow down a little bit, buddy. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Grow your hair out a little bit.
Right.
Seriously. Because they are so conditioned that things have to be very precise, which it's amazing to see how well they can work. Though when you see like deployments, or even when our guys went over to war, I mean, there was some stuff that was insane. Like when my ex-husband was in Iraq, they outfought their supply lines. So for a while there, they didn't have access to water.
Oh my gosh.
Like my ex used to put people on poop burning detail. They would sit on a pot and they'd have to burn their poop because that was the only way they had to dispose of stuff. So, I mean, it's an amazing system. They can do some phenomenal stuff, but to get all these cogs working together,
right.
Well, I mean, it's they just all laugh about it. They're supposed to be one of the number one, militaries in the world, and they fought their supply line, and they're burning their poop and trying not to get dehydrated.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Yeah, some of the stuff that it's really weird to kind of be on the tail end of it. Being a part of that community at the place that I was. Again, I'm a legacy, and most of us are. So most of us are born in it,
right?
And it just kind of filters into our family. It's really all we know,
right? Both
of my girls have dated military. In fact, my youngest is in a relationship in the military, and they were both like, "I don't want to do this," and these are your peeps, man.
You can't. Yeah, it's just that gravity that kind of pulls you back into it.
We speak the same language. We understand it.
And honestly, that was going to be one of my questions.
Yeah.
But before, because I knew your involvement with the military, I didn't know it was that ingrained. I didn't know it goes all the way back through your childhood.
Yeah.
Because one of the questions I was going to ask is, how long does it take you to learn all the acronyms?
Okay, so now I'm serving in the Air Force, and I sat today for a commander's call, meaning the new commander has taken over, and she was introducing all these different plans that she was going to implement, and some of their acronyms, it took me a minute. I'm like, oh, crap. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, shit. I started making notes, thinking I got to look this one up. It just takes a while.
Right.
It really does. And they go so fast. There's actually classes you can take as a spouse
really?
To learn all that stuff.
I suppose that is pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Because, as a spouse, you're going to want to know kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
And you have to, wow.
I have a funny story. I don't know if we've got time.
We got time.
So when I was married, and we were stationed in Fort Riley, I met a bunch of people, and Italian women, come on over, let's have dinner. So it was my girlfriends, and they were bringing their husbands. And my husband said to me, what does so-and-so do? And I said, so-and-so's on a tank. And he says, oh, he's a dad. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So we keep going, and we're all sitting down to dinner, and I go, hey, Joel, David tells me you're a dad. And he looks up, and he goes, yeah, I'm a dad. And I proceed to get the kick under the table. What? What'd I say? And so after dinner, they quickly leave. And he's like, why the hell did you call him a dumbass tanker? I said, when did I say that? He said, you called him a dad. I said, I didn't know I was calling him a dumbass tanker. Why didn't you tell me? He's like, I go, do you think that's why they laughed? He's like, yeah. also decided to join the military. And he wanted to be on a tank. So there's a big rivalry between Bradleys and tanks. So my nephew decides he wants to be on a tank. And so he's like, I get to be on a tank and I'm going to wear spurs and Stetsons. And I'm like, no, Scotty, no. So then he goes, I was like, Scotty, you're going to be a dad. He goes, what's that? I go, ask your friends, they'll tell you. I gotta go. I'm like, that's not funny. I'm like, what? Did somebody tell you what a dad is, honey? He still hasn't forgiven me for that one. He still brings that one up. But yeah.
Wow. So yeah, I mean that's a whole different culture to learn if you're not familiar with it. And even what I'm hearing is even though you grew up in it, you're still constantly adapting to it.
They're all very specific about what they do, even down to units. So like when we were stationed in Fort Riley, David did a lot of his promotional stuff there. So you have to learn military history. You have to learn all kinds of stuff. I know far more than I ever needed to know about 116. That was the unit that he was affiliated with. And it goes back to like Indian Wars. I mean, I'm serious.
Oh, wow.
They know battles, they know awards, because the units get awarded this stuff. So they have to like clock off that knowledge. And I was studying with him,
Wow.
And it's a lot of pressure for them to get promoted. They have to go before a board. In the Army at the time, it was him becoming an NCO, so it would have been an E5, an E6. Oh, I'm sorry.
Non-commissioned officer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So NCO is a big deal. Right. So prior to being an NCO, you're new to the military. You have to earn the right to tell somebody else what to do, basically.
Right.
And it's a very honorable place to be. So that's the first time you become a sergeant. Right. Okay. And so, it's a big deal. Another story that David did not warn me for. So they call him, it's stripes, right? They call him blood stripes, and I didn't know what that means. So, a little bit of background: the military uniforms have changed a lot. But David was old school, so he used to shine his boots, and they would wear their rank with pins. Okay, and the dammits that go in the back? Yep. You know why they call them the dammit?
Because they poke you?
Because when you drop it, you can't find it.
Oh.
So what they do with their stripe, the first stripe that they get, is they don't put the dammit on the back. And they take the highest ranking person and the lowest ranking person. Now, mind you, I helped David get promoted. This is a big deal, right? He didn't warn me that they were going to do this. So I'm there watching him get this. So they call biggest, highest ranking and lowest ranking. The guy who was the lowest ranking was the biggest guy I'd ever seen. And they go and they like punch him in the clavicle. And he's got to take that. Again, Italian woman. I almost attacked these people. I almost had to sit on my hands. I was like, what are they doing to you? And he's like, shut up. I'm like, you know what I mean? And they did that, and when he got home, it was just like a mess. It was a mess. Bruising, blood. I was just like, I'm going to kill you. How dare you tell me that I should go here for this, and then you didn't warn me of this stuff. And that's part of their kind of honor system.
It's kind of a rite of passage, I guess.
Yes, right? Yes. I don't know if they still do that now. Oh. I wonder, because they don't do the pins. Now everything's Velcro. So
right.
I don't know how they do it. I'll have to ask.
I'm sure they find a way.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of hazing getting into these groups.
I imagine.
But again, what they do is so very precise. In the enlisted side of the house, they have to know every detail. Same with officers, but just different. You know what I mean? Right. So officers typically come in with a degree, and then it's a lot more, as I understand, political. And how they gain rank, but for the enlisted side of the house, it's very difficult. And I know in the Air Force they have to take tests, but for the most part, and it's very, very tough. And being an NCO is a really big thing, non-commissioned officer.
Sure. Now, one thing that we were talking about earlier, before we started the interview, we're kind of just chatting it up about work and everything, And one of the things that you mentioned is you said that in your current job, the lack of paperwork.
Yeah.
Which is a first for us, as far as, because there's so much paperwork that goes in, like, especially if you're billing insurance and all sorts of paperwork.
It's the weirdest thing.
So with your job, you don't take notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to guess that that has something to do with confidentiality.
So again, we're expected to be a ventilation point as I'm perceiving it. So we're there, but we're supposed to be incognito, right? So
Okay.
we're there, but not, like obvious. And it's to give people an opportunity to come and talk to somebody without fear for losing their job or stigma.
For the listener, to kind of explain how that is so different from the way therapy is out in the private sector. Like, because, when I was doing clinical work, when I went, like, we had to, like anything, we had to document because, if anything got called into court, we have to be very clear about, who came in, what their complaint was, how we treated them, what our interventions were.
Right.
But is part of that because the military kind of has that reputation of, like, there's so much documentation in every other area that there's, like, no secrets, that people are just kind of afraid that if I go speak to a therapist, that's going to go in my file and everybody above me in rank is going to have access to that file?
Well, I don't know that that's not unfounded.
Right.
The rank structure is entitled to a lot more stuff than what we would see in the civilian sector. They don't have the same rights. And again, I'm treating them at a different level.
Right.
So we've often had prospective clients call and say, "Hey, I have something I need a letter for," and I'm like, "I can't help you. I cannot help you because I cannot document that I've seen you." So
even if they're asking it, you can't.
Cannot do it.
Really?
We have to keep the position as, again, as open as possible. We don't want to interfere with the stigma. We don't want people to be fearful of coming in. The rates of suicide on military installations are really high.
Right.
Same thing for vet population. So this is a community that's going to hurt themselves far more than anyone else can hurt them. And I find, too, a lot of it, the work I'm doing, is reassuring them, number one, that they're normal and that their thought process is extreme. And it makes sense if, fear is a motivator. However, we can get through a lot of the extenuating circumstances. So I can help, calm them down and walk them through how to cope with things. But again, in the military, the laws have changed about being able to carry a weapon. So, if you have a mental health issue, or if you have a domestic violence issue, if you have an addiction issue, you can't carry a weapon.
Does it matter?
They can't do their job.
Does it matter what the mental health issue? Because when you say if you've got a mental health issue, you can't carry a weapon, that's like...
So that's one of the reasons why, again, I'm not documenting and I'm not diagnosing either. I'm doing short-term solution-focused work, right? Coping skills, and they would like us to limit even to 12 sessions, which is fair.
Sure.
Okay?
You can get a lot done in 12 sessions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I mean, even something like, just kind of a minor depressive episode will prevent them from...
Well, okay, so because I did work on that side of the house as a tech, so with my bachelor's degree, right? And we were just making appointments, bringing people in, doing, beginning the first line of assessments. Mm-hmm. So it appears some of the lower level diagnosis, like adjustment disorder.
Okay, right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you got to recognize, too, the military population is asked to do a lot of stuff that, most of us don't do. So they're expected to move around frequently.
Right.
Right? And they're expected to go, let's say, a deployment could be going to Korea for a year. And they're expected to come home and jump right back in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They do get some leave time, but it's going to take a little while to, even if you go to Afghanistan or Iraq, how do you slow down and readjust to, they call it life in garrison, meaning when you're stationed stateside and you're just doing, your training stuff, you're preparing to go to war, right? Which is what most of them do. They prepare to go to war. Used to be that they didn't go often, but that's changed since Iraq and Afghanistan. So now most people go. And the rotations are different. It's certainly based on what they do or even what branch of service they're in. So, and they're expected to come back and just roll with it, and don't change. Don't be upset about it. Just shut up and get to work.
Right.
And so that's a lot to adjust to. So it makes sense that we could have a starting line. Diagnosis of adjustment disorder. It doesn't stop them from doing their job. It, gives them an opportunity, just to kind of work with, can we kind of come out of that? And if people, don't respond well to that, then the threat of being discharged happens.
Wow. So in your work with this population, if you were to kind of make comparisons to your work outside, like in the private sector with the civilians, are you seeing different patterns, or do you have people come in to see you for things that you didn't see as often in the private sector, or is it pretty consistent?
I would say the weird stuff that I saw with the vets in the private sector, first of all, the fact that we were treating vets from the VA because we were a choice provider, that was really cool. I didn't ever think there would be a day that the VA would openly say, hey, we can't treat people, so you can, which, again, another dual relationship. As I understand choice, the VA that refers is responsible for actually saying, hey, we can't treat this person here, these people here, and we're also going to pay you for doing what we cannot do. Again, dual relationship that just ain't pretty.
Right.
Just ain't pretty. But anyways, we had a lot of vets that came from the VA that were in choice. We also had a lot of vets who were not in choice, meaning they had their own private insurance. So let's say they did, 6 years of service, probably gone to Afghanistan, probably have gone to Iraq, Korea, wherever, but they're not coming to seek services through through the VA. They were seeking services through their private insurance, and we saw such a disparity in care. So the VA, for the most part, would give us 90 days, which was amazing to have, but private insurances would not. And we had people that were working on the same stuff, basically sitting in the same group as vets or first responders, yet they weren't accessing it through the VA. And many of them, so in order to qualify for VA service, typically you have to retire, right? Or you have to be disabled.
Right. Okay.
So you retire in such a way that says, hey, I got an issue, and the VA says, okay, we'll take care of you. Many people who don't do the full 20 years come out of the military with very little knowledge that they could go to the VA and get services. That it's changing now, but it's still a little bit of that honor system where they don't want to access the system because they don't think it's appropriate, and a lot of them are very, very sick. Yeah. But they want to, it needs to be for people who are really sick. And many times I've said, you're already sick. Right. You really need to go to the VA and access some services. But it's a whole other system too to actually go in the VA and say, hey, not only am I sick, but I'm sick because of my service. It's not natural for that population to even speak that way.
Right. So in your work, providing therapy, are there special things that you have to consider when working with veterans that it wouldn't come across to the average therapist working with civilians?
Oh my gosh, yes. So, comparing, okay. So if I'm working with an addict, okay, let's say, and I don't know, am I speaking a foreign language? If I work with an alcoholic, it's very different than if I'm working with an opiate addict, okay?
Right.
Somebody who has gotten their addiction to an IV, where they need to use IV or have become homeless or, have to prostitute. The disease progresses. And so one of the things that happens with vets is that, first you got to know what branch. Then you got to know. Then you got to know what rank. Then you got to know.
So all that
what
is
language
relevant.
They speak. Absolutely. What did they do? What did they do in the military? What was that like for them? How did they come out? A lot of them, if somebody was dishonorably discharged. So for a lot of people who, let's say, do multiple tours, and the only way they deal with it is drink themselves to oblivion. Let's say they get a DUI, heaven forbid, a DUI on post or on base. They are up for a dishonorable discharge. I understand there is a class action lawsuit going on where a lot of people who've been dishonorably discharged for post-traumatic stress disorder, symptomatic behavior, addiction, symptomatic behavior, serious mental health issues that are symptomatic, that the military deemed them as a bad guy.
Right.
And, it's probably whatever coping system that they had at the time, because, again, it's so hard to access care, either the fear, the stigma, or both, right?
Now, so I'm gonna ask a question that's gonna highlight my ignorance on the topic. But if you are dishonorably discharged from the military, do you miss out on a lot of the benefits that you would get in normal retirement from the military? So access to the VA. So you've got a condition that was, if not created, at least made larger by the fact that you were in the military, and then your coping skill for dealing with that got you kicked out, which cuts you off from access to care for that condition.
Pretty much. One of the things, it used to be that the VA was really looking for malingering for a lot of symptoms.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was there. And again, let me just say, I've never worked for the VA. I wasn't able to get into the system, but that was the kind of overwhelming impression that they were looking for, that it was malingering. And it used to be, I got to kind of back up. So there's a couple things that's very personal for me in this whole idea. So when my father was sick, so again, my dad did his last tour in Vietnam. He had come home in 1970. Okay, I was born in 71. He died in 72. But when he first started having symptomatic behavior or symptoms of, he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. So he had flu-like symptoms. Now, mind you, my dad, believe it or not, my dad had the flying cross. At one point, he grounded a plane because it was overweight, took a bunch of crap for it, but saved everybody's life. So they awarded him with the flying cross.
Oh, wow.
Huge, huge deal.
Yeah.
It's like one of the top 3, honors you can get. So this guy was, highly decorated, right? And he was sick. And so at that time, the thought process was that he was a POS, piece of shit. So he got a lot of shit for being sick. And when they finally figured it out, not only him, but a bunch of people he worked with were just as sick. And they just all started getting sick. What makes it worse, back then they used to do exploratory surgery. So they knew my dad had cancer, and they went and opened him up to look to see where the cancer was. When they closed him up, this happened at the VA, closed him up, they left a sponge in.
Oh my God.
They didn't know that they had left a sponge in. This is, again, 1970. And what happened was he got an infection in his abdomen and his wound burst. And so that's really what killed him. So he was immunocompromised because he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. Anyways, there's no opportunity at that time to sue.
Right.
You don't sue the government.
Yeah.
So they admitted at the time that my dad had a service-connected death. He was 36 years old when he died, which is phenomenal. And, so it was more about what went wrong for him in his treatment. So
Yeah.
the whole idea of the VA back then was you had to demonstrate that you had a need for treatment. Like they used to say, if there was any kind of a concussive event or any kind of an explosion, they used to say that you had to be within a certain radius of that to have a claim. And it was on the military personnel. It was their burden to demonstrate that they were there. Can you imagine what that must have been like for those guys?
Yeah.
I've treated many a Vietnam vet who talked to me about that kind of a burden, how much time it took them to get approved within the VA for need of treatment. And they're even admitting that Agent Orange, how long ago did it happen? I want to say it was like in the 90s or the late 80s that the government finally said, yes, Agent Orange was an issue, and these are all the diseases that you can have that we will fully fund you to say. And same thing with Desert Storm, same thing with OIF, so Iraqi freedom and Afghani freedom.
Yeah.
So it's a hot mess.
Yeah.
And so there's always that, the weird part of when they're active, they don't want to say they're sick. When David came back from Iraq, it was horrible. We got him treatment off post. We paid cash to get him some help because we didn't want to affect his career.
Right.
When he was getting out, man, he was listing it all.
Yeah.
And he ended up getting a great disability rating. The weirdest part of that is he used some of the damage. In the military, they have this phrase, shit rolls downhill.
Right.
So what happened to us, he became very just lost in it, very sick, and he took it out on us.
Yeah.
He used that as a means to say that he was 100% disabled. He got it, which then X'd me out of my benefits, that I wasn't entitled to any of the retirement or any of the pension. In fact, he was suing me for alimony, and it's still not fully settled. So I have that little bit of a fear that, holy shit, if I make too much money, I'm going to go back to court.
Right.
So anyway, treating the military and treating vets is such a complex issue because,
I feel like, you went into talking about all of these aspects behind what's going on, and we still haven't gotten yet to the reason why they came in for the appointment in the first place. It seems like there's just so much stuff behind the scenes. Does it feel like it takes forever to get to that point?
It's like treating somebody who's been chronically homeless or somebody who has a very significant diagnosis, right? Like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or schizoaffective. And by the way, they have those similar diagnoses as well. It's not, all of us don't just come in with post-traumatic stress disorder. They usually have, an addiction issue and, a legal issue and, homelessness and whatnot. The wraparound that's needed to really care for this population is significant. And the VA is outnumbered, and they really are struggling to care for all of them. And the system, again, is broken, in my opinion, of course, because I'm a CPC.
Sure.
My thoughts are get all hands on deck.
Right.
Let's get everybody out there to help. Bizarrely enough, I can treat somebody in the civilian sector that the VA said I cannot treat within their hospital. It makes no sense to me.
That's really bizarre.
I can treat him really as an MFLAC because I don't take notes, right?
Right.
But I can't treat him in behavioral health, which in behavioral health, that's the on-post military mental health facility. They're not doing what we would do in an inpatient facility, which incidentally, my first job in mental health in Columbus, Georgia, we had the all of the clients that came from the military installation that they had like on post, maybe like a 35 bed, and we were like a 150 bed facility, so we got all the overflow. So again, I could treat him as a civilian in a mental hospital, can't treat him within the VA. It's just this weirdest thing.
Oh, there's so many. Do you ever feel hopeless, or is it draining on you to see all of these issues that, because we've got this huge population of people who need help.
Absolutely.
They're willing to access it.
Yes and no.
Sometimes. Even if they are willing to access it, then there's all these other systemic issues.
Right. You have to jump through hoops as a clinician to demonstrate to them that you know your shit, you speak the language.
Sure.
And you're respectable. You're going to help me. No, not only are you going to help me, but you're going to help my body. And that's usually the biggest issue. Nothing pisses a vet off more than me talking about codependency. Ooh, do they get mad at me over that?
So for the listener, what's codependency?
My best definition of codependency is an unequalness in a relationship. So if we were going to scale a relationship 0 to 100, the codependent person typically is written about the one that's at 100. Yeah. I believe that it's both one at 100 and the one at 0, because I think they switch, and I think different things happen to get them at both sides of it. But the military doesn't typically ask their people to be thoughtful, except for their body. You got to take care of your body. Yeah. You never leave anybody behind, and you risk yourself for your body, which is incredibly codependent. Yeah. And it's ingrained from jump. Sure.
Yeah, because that's kind of their whole thing, right? I mean, that's...
And so, it's a very heavy emotional situation to throw these people in. Because, again, so many situations are out of their control. And so, again, a lot of what we see is survivor guilt. I have it myself. Oh, yeah. So we lost a friend when David was in Iraq. And, oh my God, the survivor guilt we all have. I mean, I have it horribly for him. I saw his Bradley on fire on CNN. We have rules to save our, as a spouse, we had rules, don't ever watch the news. And I got stuck because at the time, David was one of the first ones over, and they were embedded. You remember CNN was embedded with a lot of these units. So I just wanted to try and see what it was like for David, but I got stuck. And when Gary's Bradley was hit by an IED, I'll never get that out of my head. His Bradley on fire. Wow. Then they came home. All the soldiers came home, and they wanted to tell Cassie what it was like, what Gary was like, and I was there with her, and I couldn't leave her side, right? And I'm hearing these stories of these guys trying to pull him out, and it was the worst. It was, and I'll never get that out of my head. Yeah. And her babies, so Gary didn't die alone. His dismount, Mark, died as well. Mark had a child who was the same age I was when my dad died. And his wife said to me, she's like, do you think he'll remember his dad? I couldn't lie to her. I said, well, I hope he can. I don't have any memory of my father. Right. And we were the same age. But you can help him remember that. If there's big events that he, has a memory for, you can talk about it. You can give him a memory that's, fair and help to kind of enhance that. But I'll never forget that when she asked me that question and what that felt like. Yeah. And we had an experience where Brianna was just a kid and David went somewhere, and I was driving in the car and she said, Mommy, that's my daddy. And I said, no, baby, your daddy's gone. He's away. And she's like, that's my daddy. You're leaving my daddy. And I was like, oh my God, no. I called my mom that night and said, Ma, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what happened. And she said, in her broken Italian, son of a bitch, you did it worse to me. I took you to the commissary. You were a baby. You grabbed somebody in a flight suit grabbed their leg and said that was my daddy. And I see guys in flight suits every day, and I'm just like, I have this like weird reaction to these guys in their flight suits, and I don't remember grabbing a hold of somebody's leg as a child and not letting go. My mom crying, him crying, me crying. And I still see these guys in their flight suits, and I'm just like, shit. I need to get back in therapy. I don't know, man in the military, just all of that kind of combines to just put you in this spot. So, should I be treating this population? I feel like I want to care for them. There were times where I thought, well, maybe I should stop. Maybe it's more about my stuff than it is theirs. When I got out into the civilian population and I started to recognize that there were vets that were enmeshed as civilians, I recognized I have the ability to speak their language. I can get the buy-in. I can check my stuff at the door. In fact, when I do talk about some of the stuff that I share with them, again, Gary's story, Cassie's story, even my divorce, it tends to give them an understanding that I've kind of earned my chops. Yeah. And I'll talk to you.
Yeah. And that's really important. Yeah, that's incredibly important. And having something, some kind of lived experience that you can offer can be very therapeutic and very helpful in that therapeutic relationship.
Right.
Actually, the last interview I did when I was talking to Junior about the same thing, like he's got 15 years recovery.
Right.
I don't have that, I've got a college education and a master's degree, but when I go in there, I can have meaningful sessions. I can do a lot of really good work.
Right.
But I never have that been there, lived experience connection with somebody.
Yeah, it helps.
Mm-hmm.
Even dealing with somebody who's first generation, there's a lot of people in the military who actually come to the United States to get their citizenship by serving in the military.
Right.
So, even, talking to a client in my, she's like, my English, she wants to join the military. Her English isn't very good. I'm like, well, let's see if you can take the ASVAB in Spanish. Let's at least check.
Right.
Right? I mean, I'm helping her find English as a second language classes and things like that. Again, I get that.
Yeah.
I still hear my mother screaming at me in Italian. So, at least I learned to speak and write the language. So again, there's so many parts about being in the community that you just wouldn't think, you would deal with. Again, people who don't speak English, or, people who first time they've ever been to this country and all of that stuff. Oh my God, my mom, the stories they tell about my mom. Apparently I think they were in France. No, I think they were in South Carolina. She got snails somewhere and was going to cook them. And my dad had to tell her, no, they're poisonous. You can't eat the snails from the yard. She was so excited to make escargot, But yeah, so there's all kinds of, stories that I grew up, anecdotal parts of the military and all of our kind of assimilation into American military culture, I guess.
So, looking forward, what do you see is kind of the current state of events with mental health with the veteran population, and what do you see kind of happening in the future? Do you feel like we're going in the right direction? Are you hopeful for things changing?
I think for me as a professional, I've always have been challenging myself to write. I don't think that first of all, research on the military population is pretty new.
Yeah.
The VA and the military hang on to their stats. Oh my God, like with an iron fist. So it's really hard to know what we're really dealing with. So again, working with the vets in the civilian population, I was pushing for a program. Most people are like, what the hell? Why do we need a vet-specific program? And I think that's crazy.
Right.
We need it because it's so hard to get in there. And the numbers of suicide and death are just high. Relapse and overdose and, you know, all of it. It's awful. So I would like to write. I've been creating a workbook, just foundational stuff that I just do with all my clients. And I would like to do one that's vet specific, just because, you know, just kind of a highlight to help a therapist, you know, talk to them about their MOS. You know, in fact, rank. You need to know the difference between an officer and an enlisted. Please don't call an officer, you know, sergeant or an enlisted sir. Oh my goodness, you know, there's just big faux pas that you just don't do.
Right.
And so, just the basic stuff, I guess, and then just trying to kind of help people to, you know, kind of bridge the gap of understanding them as a population, not necessarily so that we can kind of, you know, separate them, but just understand them and treat them in a way that would be holistic and fair to them. Even within the VA system, a lot of the clinicians that I know that work at the VA or have worked for the VA, they don't speak a lot of the language. There's very little research about how can a civilian help somebody in this system. You know, again, my first week as an MFLAC, I was told, one of the staff members, she said, you know, she was retired military and she came in as a contractor. She goes, you know, I would never talk to you if I were active. And I said, really? Yeah. She's like, you look at you. Those shoes, I don't know how you walk in those shoes. She said, you're not approachable.
Wow.
And it's the same shit we get from addicts,
right?
Yeah. What do you read that out of a book? Hey, you gonna help me? You know, like, what the fuck ever. I ain't got nothing to prove to you, buddy. Right? I promise you. I remember when you were my supervisor, you taught me that whole thing. Well, would you ask a surgeon? I used to do that. I don't do that shit anymore. I teach my interns that. But, you know, look, I'm really straight with them. I'm like, look, I get that you don't trust me. Cool. That's great.
Yeah.
Hear what I have to say. And, you know, I am more than willing to explain anything to you, answer questions, but right now I'm going to talk and teach you something here. And so if I don't prove that I know what the hell I'm talking about, then you have every reason to leave my group. And for the most part, they would either A, leave my group, or they're like, bitch! and then usually I would get them. But nobody has time to, you know, stop and prove myself to each and every one in my group. It's like, either you come along or you don't. You're not ready. And the vets are a little different. They like it when you're straight with them.
Sure.
I was in a group with the vets, and it was a mixed vet. And one guy was sitting in the front, and the whole time he's writing shit down. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And he's like, Army, definitely Army. And I'm like tuning him out. And then later I'm like, what? And he's like, you're Army, aren't you? And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I am.
That's funny.
My father was Air Force and my ex-husband was Army, so I speak way more Army than and I don't even know when I turn into that Army wife or that Army. The transference I got from many of the vets was, you sound like my ex-wife. And I was like,
oh really?
Oh shit.
Wow.
I need to tone my shit down. It's a problem. I'm sorry. The multiple times I've been threatened to be killed, it was mostly by vets.
Oh, really?
Ones that transferred for me as their ex-wife. So clearly I need to watch my shit.
Yeah, that's definitely something you have to look out. I would have never thought of that.
Yeah, the last time I was threatened to be killed, that was it.
The recent. Oh, okay.
That's
good to know.
The many times I've been threatened to be killed.
I've been threatened to be killed, but I've never... Like, there was one guy that threatened to kill me. He was like a drug dealer, and he threatened to, like, put a hit out on me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But I didn't take it very seriously. Like, he was... I don't know.
No, this guy was going to... He was going to choke me.
Wow.
And I had a retired cop in the same group, and then he proceeds to tell me after, he goes, do you know he's been threatening you multiple times? I'm like, oh shit.
Oh, that's scary.
He would like allude to sleeping with his gun under his pillow, and that maybe he had his gun in his truck, and I'm like, fuck, how did I miss that?
Wow.
The guy was a cop, so
Right.
Oh, that's one of those moments you're like, oh shit.
Wow.
I might need to stop doing my job and really think about what my body is doing right now. Yeah.
So, last question I have for you.
Okay.
Because we've got a lot of people who listen to this show who, some of them are connected to the military, but specific to the folks that listen to this show that know nothing about military life, what is it that you think would be the most valuable thing for them to understand about this population?
Mm-hmm. Ooh, it's tough. It's really hard to break through.
Yeah.
You have to earn your way in. And something very minor, which they will not tell you, is it for them. When we first started treating them at the agency I was at, we had a lot of them just run away. They would just...
Oh, so whatever it was just triggering them, but you never found out what it was. Huh?
So I made a point out of talking to them about it. I'd say, we've been treating vets for a little while, and our numbers of people just running away are really high. And it kills me that I could help somebody and they run away from it. Mm-hmm. How can I help you? How can I help your buddy? I just get right in there. What do I need to know that I don't know? I had one client, most specifically, his PTSD was so bad that he had to sit in a room with the door open and he had to look out. And he was always tracking everything I said and he would comment on it. And he could write everything on the board verbatim, but I had to let that guy just sit and had to have a lot of patience for what most people would take as disrespect or, them, being insubordinate. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's not it at all. And they are very hypercritical of their buddies. So, like, if they get a buy-in, let's say, for instance, they trust me and their buddy wants to mess with me, they're going to be all over their buddy.
Right.
If they have a buy-in for me.
Right.
And vice versa. If I get on their buddy and we haven't had some sort of a deal, then they're going to come at me. And so we kind of, had to make the peace.
A lot about rapport building. Wow.
But it's consistent. And I think for a lot of them, once you hit a certain point with it, that they're going to stay with you forever. And that's their expectation.
Right.
We're in now.
Exactly.
I'm going to be with you forever. Okay.
Well, Monique, thank you very much. I appreciate
Absolutely.
the work that you do. I think all of America appreciates the work that you do.
Well,
so thank you,
that.
and thank you for being a guest on the show.
Well, thank you.
All right.
I can't wait to hear it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all the time that we've got for this week's episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thanks to all those of you who contribute to our show. We really appreciate it. Remember, Pod Therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by opening this episode's description in your podcast app and copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys, and on patreon.com/therapy. Do you want to submit your own question to the show? Ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tangeman. Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.